It's my great pleasure to be here with you and welcome you all to our Club Pulmonale scientific session number 083. I welcome you all on behalf of Club Pulmonale, our chairman, Dr. M. G. Chandrasekharan sir, our finance secretary, C. Muralidharan, and all members of Club Pulmonale. We've been going on virtual meetings right from March 2020, and this month also we'll be on the virtual. We plan to go for virtual means only by also in the next month, March 2021, and from April can have the pleasure of meeting everyone personally and having good dinner and whatnot. So I thank all the members for their wholehearted support for this continuing programs to be conducted so nicely. It is the 86th month of meeting. Last session we had an excellent speakers. It was our Club Pulmonale 7th annual conference. The highlight of the conference last month was the chief guest was Sandeep Salvi and Rajadhar. Both are the faces of Indian pulmonology to the world, great research scholars. Yet they were so eminent and yet they were so simple. They were with us throughout the conference last Sunday, the 24th of January. It was a great treat for all of us. We had top quality speakers from across the state, from various branches, including pulmonology, pediatrics, gynecology. We had all the people. We had a great time. Almost 280 doctors have logged in at that time. So it was an unforgettable conference for us. And to go along with this we have seen long back, safeguard our lungs, safeguard your life. It's not too late. Smoking health is very obvious, so you should be very careful. At least you should spend a few minutes with the patient, advise him to stop smoking. And now we go on to this session. Today's session, topic for today is acute pulmonary embolism, diagnosis and management. Acute pulmonary embolism still remains a great myth amongst all the people. Everybody gets baffled by it at some time or other. You should have a very high level of clinical acumen, of suspicion, and great looking forward to trouble. All these things you should have to diagnose a patient of acute pulmonary embolism. The classical acute pulmonary embolism, which comes with sudden onset of dyspnea, severe chest pain, back pain, dropping pulse rate, dropping BP, the BP, tachypnea and tachycardia, patient with severe shock. Unfortunately, this picture is common with many of the acute conditions in both in the respiratory system and in the cardiovascular system. Not only that, this acute presentation of pulmonary embolism is not that too common. Many times, patient comes with other symptoms and signs which only an astute clinical physician can diagnose early. In fact, in such a developed country like States, last year, as per one statistics, 400,000 people died of pulmonary embolism there, and at least 100,000 could have been easily saved for primary diagnosis. So this means that a pulmonary embolism needs acute. You should diagnose very fast and very short interval. And many times the treatment of embolism also is lagging behind. We lose many patients. Still today, many patients of embolism go undiagnosed. So with all these things, this topic always is hot and live. Always in any branch of medicine, they should know about it, right from general practitioner, right from house surgeon to senior papers of various branches of medicine. They should be well versed to this. So to talk about this topic today, got an excellent speaker, Dr. A. Nagarajan sir, is a concerned pulmonologist from Trichy. He finished his MBBS in 2002 from Stanley Medical College, Chennai. He finished his DTCD from Madras Medical College. Then did his DNB in the 2007-2009 in Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Kochi, Kerala. He has got a fellow of Asian Pacific Society of Respirology and fellow of American College of Chest Physicians also. He has got clinical experience in working in the Department of Pulmonary Medicine, Pondicherry Institute of Medical Sciences, Pondicherry from April 2006 to 2007. He worked with the DNB in Amrita Institute from 2007 to 2009. A lot of clinical experience got in from the Trichy Kaviraj. We know is a leading hospital in Trichy. He's also practicing chest physician at the Mithun Clinic, Trichy from June 2020 till date, 2010 till date. special training in advanced interventional pulmonology course and attended ER's rigid bronchoscopy course in the 2017. Got a lot of international bronchoscopy training also. ICU sonology also is trained. He attended a lot of international conferences and is a faculty moderator in all of them. He's considered various papers in the national and international conferences. So he has also published a lot of papers. This is a real credit to him. He's doing research in tissues issue, not all mass tumors. This is an interesting topic. So he's a member of various honor institutions. So areas of interest will be interventional pulmonology, chest radiology, sleep disorders, pleural diseases, and thoracoscopy. This is a small introduction about our Nagarajan. So welcome, sir, to your pulmonology. And now stage is yours now. Friends, once sir finishes the talk, our finance director Muller will give his vote of thanks. And after that, we can go for questions. You can type your questions in the chat box, and we look forward to having a live discussion about this evergreen topic of acute pulmonary embolism. Welcome, sir. Nagarajan to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Nice for your introduction. Thank you for finding a place in the pulmonary group. So I am looking forward to meet you all. Thank you for this opportunity. So today my topic is on acute pulmonary embolism diagnosis and management. So venous thromboembolism, which includes DVT and pulmonary embolism, is the third most common cause of acute cardiovascular syndrome, secondary to myocardial infarction and the cardiac stroke. So CVA, first more cause is the myocardial infarction, second commonest cause is the cerebrovascular accident, third important cause is the DVT and pulmonary. These are three common causes of acute cardiovascular syndrome. Today we are going to see the DVT and pulmonary embolism. So my topic is all these from the European Society of Guidelines published in 2019 in collaboration with European Respiratory Societies. All these presentations are taken from European Society Guideline. This is a main document of 670 pages and supplement of 20 pages, totally 80 pages. So we just made it in the 60 slides as a essence. It will be useful for you to make your diagnosis and management hereafter. Thank you so much. We'll start the discussion. In the discussion, we are going to deal with all these things: predisposing factors for acute pulmonary embolism, how to assess the hemodynamic status, the clinical probability scoring, which is very, very important for ordering relevant investigation. And once the diagnosis is made, how to make the pulmonary embolism risk assessment for worsening, and is there any need for reperfusion therapy, and how to follow these patients with DVT or pulmonary embolism. So first we are going to see the predisposing factors for development of pulmonary embolism. As you all know, there are strong, moderate, and weak factors. So as you all know, the long bone fractures of the lower limb and major trauma are the major cause of predisposing factors. Apart from that, I would like to highlight the hormone replacement therapy, oral contraceptive therapies, even infections, urinary tract infection or pneumonia can trigger pulmonary embolism. Recently, we had one patient admitted with pneumonia and discharged after getting relieved from pneumonia. After 4 days back, he admitted with acute onset breathlessness, found to have acute pulmonary embolism. Just keep in mind, just a small pneumonia can trigger pulmonary embolism. There are various causes, predisposing factors, which can trigger predisposing factors. To diagnose pulmonary embolism, as Sir said, a high index of suspicion is very, very important. Symptomatic, sometimes they will be asymptomatic, sometimes non-specific symptoms for diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. Sometimes Sir said, they will come with typical symptoms of chest pain, dyspnea, and hemoptysis. We will see only typical symptoms only few group of patients. Usually we are asymptomatic or non-specific. The other common symptoms are syncope and pre-syncope. In the evaluation of syncope, if you are not able to find the cause for syncope, that maybe could be due to pulmonary embolism. So keep the definition diagnosis of pulmonary embolism in the workup of syncope. The high index of suspicion. How to make a high index of suspicion?
Sorry for interruption, Nagarajan.
Yes, sir.
Some of the audience are not able to see your screen.
Okay.
Let us inquire our organizer. I am able to see you and your screen, everything. Some of the delegates, they are not able to visualize your screen.
I would request them to please refresh the page again. We are able to see it properly.
Okay.
I've just checked it.
Uh,
It's proper.
yeah. I am able to see you. I am able to see the slides.
Okay,
Right.
sir.
But some
Might be
of
that yeah, some of them might be facing some internet issues, so might
I see.
face
I
that
see.
problem. Yeah.
No, sir, they are visible, I think. There will be some problem. See, Mr. Stats are visible and they are also moving, I believe.
Right.
So you can please proceed, sir, please.
Okay, sir. So high index of suspicion is very, very important. Disproportionate discharge. That's the clinching point in this diagnosis of acute pulmonary embolism. If you are not able to find a definite cause for dyspnea, you must suspect pulmonary embolism. Then typical angina like pain. Sometimes the patient admitted with the acute onset of chest pain, angina chest pain, coronary angiogram done, normal coronary angiogram, but the patient continues to have chest pain. That may be due to the pulmonary embolism secondary to RV ischemia. So typically angina, normal coronaries, you must rule out pulmonary embolism. So is there any way to rule out pulmonary embolism? Being a medical officer or general practitioner or emergency physician, if you are able to see all the 8 factors, factor 8, if you are able to see all the factors, you can completely rule out pulmonary embolism. If you are present with all these 8 factors, age less than 50 years, pulse rate less than 100 per minute, saturation more than 94, no unilateral leg swelling, no history of hemoptysis, no recent trauma or surgery, no history of venous thromboembolism in the past, or no oral hormone use. With all 8 factors are present, you can safely rule out pulmonary embolism. This is the 8 rule of 8. If you are able to see all the 8 factors, you can rule out pulmonary embolism very easily. And it comes to the rule of 40. What is rule of 40? In patients with acute pulmonary embolism, there is 40% of patients, there will not be any predisposing factors for pulmonary embolism. In another 40% of patients, they will have normal saturation. So normal saturation doesn't rule pulmonary embolism in 40% of patients. Normal ECG or sinus tachycardia doesn't rule pulmonary embolism in 40% of patients. Even normal echo in a patient doesn't rule out pulmonary embolism in 40% of patients. So normal echo, normal ECG, normal saturation, no predisposing factors cannot rule out pulmonary embolism. That's the reason why your clinical index of suspicion must be very good to diagnose the pulmonary embolism. Otherwise, you will be losing all these 40% of patients unless you are looking for these markers. Next, we move on to the clinical probability scoring. This is very, very important for diagnosing the pulmonary embolism. This is very important to order what is the next level of investigations. This is very, very important. Clinical probability scoring is very, very important for diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. As we well aware that Bell score for pulmonary embolism. Depending upon that, we can move on to the low probability score, intermediate probability score, and high probability score. Depending upon that, only we can order the relevant investigations. So it depends upon the heart rate, respiratory rate, major trauma, hemoptysis, and cancer. Each and every score rate. Depending upon that, we have the gradings. Another score, revised Geneva score. This is a new score. By this also, we can categorize them into low risk, intermediate risk, and high risk. So categories is very, very important to order the next level of investigation for diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. So it's all this probability scoring is important only in a stable patient. Unstable patient, there is no need to do clinical probability score. Directly go on start treatment. Only in stable patients who are in suspicion of pulmonary embolism, you need to do the probability scoring. Depending upon you grade them into high, intermediate possibility, and a low probability. This is a very important step for diagnosing and ordering the investigation. So this is how the management of pulmonary embolism. In unstable patient, directly start them on anticoagulation and look for RV assessment. And if need, then confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. If needed, you can go for thrombolysis patient. In a stable patient, as I said earlier, we need to do the clinical probability scoring. With this, only diagnostic workup is starting there. Then followed by treatment algorithm. Then risk assessment for pulmonary embolism severity index. Then mainly that needed for rescue thrombolysis. Then another thing what we are going to do is a recurrence risk. If there is any possibility for recurrence risk, for which we need to do the recurrence risk status assessment. Then what is the duration of treatment depending on the recurrence risk and how to follow these patients. This is the way we are going to see the management. So what do you say hemodynamically unstable patients? These are the three criteria by which they are hemodynamically unstable. For this hemodynamically unstable patient, no need to do chronic probability scoring. Directly straight away start them on anticoagulation. What are these factors? Cardiac arrest, unexplained cardiac arrest with high index of suspicion of pulmonary embolism. Second one is the obstructive shock, systolic BP less than 90 mm Hg, or it may require vasopressor support to maintain 90 mm Hg, or end organ hyperperfusion, altered mental status, cold and clammy skin, oliguria, anuria, and increased serum lactate level. This is another criteria for hemodynamically unstable patient. Then persistent hypotension, systolic BP less than 90 mm Hg, or systolic BP drop more than 40 mm Hg within 15 minutes. Sometimes the patient come with the admission BP of 140 by 100. Within 15 minutes, the BP drop to 100. More than 40 milligram drop in BP, you must suspect pulmonary embolism, high risk pulmonary embolism, start them immediately on anticoagulation. Now comes to what are the investigations available to diagnose pulmonary embolism. D-dimer, this is a very important investigation. It's a high negative predictive value. Make sure your lab is doing the ELISA-based D-dimer test. This is very important. The ELISA-based D-dimer only has a high sensitivity. So ask your laboratory person to do the ELISA method for D-dimer testing for diagnosing pulmonary embolism. So D-dimer test, as the sensitivity decreases with the age, less than 50 years, whatever the lab value, you can take it as that. The age is more than 50 years, you need to adjust with 10 microgram per m per liter. This is more than 50 years, you need the age adjusted D-dimer measurement. Less than 50 years, we can go ahead with whatever the laboratory value. This is very important. These are new findings. So suspected PE. So this, as I said earlier, it's a high negative predictive value. If this D-dimer is negative, it rules out pulmonary embolism. There is no need to do D-dimer test in high probability for PE. That's very, very important. Don't waste time by doing a D-dimer test in high probability of pulmonary embolism patient. This indicator only in intermediate and low probability scoring patient. If it is negative, it rules out pulmonary embolism. If positive, you have to work out for other causes. Next comes is the CT pulmonary angiogram. This is a very important test. CT contrast enhanced pulmonary angiogram. The sensitivity of 83% and the specificity of 96%. This is the single most investigation which can confirm the pulmonary embolism. It elaborately, extensively delineate the pulmonary artery from the main pulmonary artery to the distal segmental pulmonary artery. If you are now, this is a very clear cut, 100% diagnostic imaging modality to diagnose pulmonary embolism. So this is mainly used in high and intermediate probability scoring patient. If you do a CT pulmonary angiogram, if you are able to find a proximal segmental filling defect, it confirms the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. No need to do any further testing. We are able to identify proximal filling defect in a CT pulmonary angiogram in patients with high and intermediate probability scoring patients. It confirms the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. No need to do any further testing. The same way, in a high probability patient, CT pulmonary angiogram shows normal study that rules out pulmonary embolism. Now, other category, low and intermediate probability patients with the CT pulmonary angiogram is normal that rules out pulmonary embolism. So, CT pulmonary angiogram is the most indication for diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. Next comes to the ventilation perfusion scanning. Ventilation perfusion scanning. The indication is mainly for low clinical probability scoring patients. The indication is very, very important. No need to spend time on setting the ventilation perfusion scan unless this indication is fulfilled. Low clinical probability scoring, young female patients to avoid radiation, and pregnant patient and chronic renal failure, and any patient with contact allergy. Because ventilation perfusion scan is most of the time it is non-diagnostic. 50% of patients we give non-diagnostic value. This carries low prognostic value. So we are not advising for ventilation perfusion scanning unless these 4 criteria are met. If it is normal, it rules out pulmonary embolism. High probability scoring means it confirms the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. Most of the time, it gives us non-diagnostic test. That means that doesn't rule out pulmonary embolism. You need to do compression ultrasound as an additional tool in addition to ventilation perfusion scan in the above set patient to confirm the diagnosis. So this is mainly indicated only for 4 indications, not for other indications. Next comes to the compression ultrasound. This is a very, very important investigation you can do at the bedside. Compression ultrasound. Look for the visibility of the clot in the popliteal or femoral vein, and compression. If inability to compress the vessel is the indication for is the confirmed diagnosis for DVT. So this is the bedside investigation, very important tool. If you are not able to do CTPA or D-dimer, or the patient is in the emergency department, just bring the ultrasound machine and you can do a compression ultrasound and confirm the diagnosis of DVT or pulmonary DVT. If the DVT is present in a highly suspected pulmonary embolism, it confirms pulmonary embolism, no need to do any further testing. Next one is the 4 areas you need to look for the compression ultrasound. Bilateral femoral and bilateral popliteal areas. If the DVT is present, you can confirm the patient in a suspected patient pulmonary embolism. It confirms the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. No need to go for CTPA and other investigation. Directly start them on anticoagulation. Suspected PE patient, unable to shift the patient, or you have the capacity to do a bedside ultrasound or echocardiography, and you are able to diagnose DVT on the spot, directly start them on anticoagulation. No need to do CTPA or wasting time in managing the patients. Additional tests. Previously, they had to do CT venography in addition to CT pulmonary angiography. There is no recommendation nowadays for to do a CT venography. Then MR angiography also not recommended for diagnosing pulmonary embolism because they have carry low sensitivity. Next comes to the once we made the diagnosis, we need to go for the risk assessment. Why we need to do the risk assessment? Because sometimes you even start them on anticoagulation. Sometimes they develop the RV dysfunction, RV failure, and the patient may collapse on anticoagulation. So whether there is a need for thrombolysis in any patient, you must do the risk assessment once you confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. Once you confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism, we need to do the risk assessment for RV failure, RV dysfunction. That's very, very important to avoid early death in patients. So what are the factors which need to make the assessment of risk assessment? It's various multiple factors, clinical factors, echocardiography, CT pulmonary angiography, and biomarkers, and then pulmonary embolism severity index. It's a combination of all these factors which make us to assess the risks for RV dysfunction or collapse in the patient with confirmed pulmonary diagnosis. So clinical severity, by which what are the clinical severity? Tachycardia, tachypnea, low systolic BP, as Sir said, and the low saturation and syncopal attack. This is very, very important. If you are able to find these factors, that means the patient is sinking because of RV dysfunction. Next one is the echocardiographic finding. This is very, very important. If you are able to, this seen only in 20% of patients with confirmed pulmonary embolism. So unfortunately, it is only 20%. RV-LV diameter ratio more than 1 or McConnell sign, and if you are able to visualize the right heart mobile thrombus and a 60-60 sign, the pulmonary ejection acceleration time less than 60 minutes, and a mid-systolic notch with the MID elevated less than 60 mm Hg is a 60-60 sign. In M mode, TAPC, tricuspid annual pain, systolic exertion less than 60 mm. These are the classical 4 findings you can see in acute pulmonary embolism in echo. But unfortunately, these findings are present only in 20% of patients with confirmed pulmonary embolism. If the cardiologists come and say there is no evidence of pulmonary embolism in echo, that you must, if your clinical suspicion is very high, you must go ahead, do it with CT pulmonary angiography, because it will present only in 20% of patients with confirmed pulmonary embolism. Then if you are not able to, if you don't have the access to do a echocardiography, you can assess the RV-LV diameter ratio in a CT pulmonary angiography with the help of radiologists. If the ratio is more than 1, that means patient is developing RV dysfunction. So I don't have any echo, I don't have any CT pulmonary angiogram. This is any other way to make the patient is diagnosed RV dysfunction. There are biomarkers which are available. Troponin T more than 14 picogram per ml. Hard type fatty acid binding protein. Hard type fatty acid binding protein more than 6 nanogram per ml. The NT-proBNP value more than 600 picogram per ml in a confirmed patient's PE indicates the patient is developing RV dysfunction. This is a very important biomarker if you are not able to do a echocardiography or CT pulmonary angiography. Then this is the pneumonia severity index. So depending upon that, age, sex, and the cancer, heart failure, and the chronic lung diseases, and the various vital parameters, we can divide them pulmonary embolism severity index. We are based upon we can categorize them into 1 to 5 category. If as the category increases, the mortality risk increases. So the mortality risk also depends upon the various factors which I elaborated previously: clinical parameters, echocardiographic evidence, and the biomarkers, and the CT pulmonary angiogram of RV-LV ratio, and the pulmonary embolism severity index. All depends upon that. You can give the mortality risk of the patient. So once we make the diagnosis of acute pulmonary embolism, we need to do the pulmonary embolism severity index. Depending on that, we can categorize them into 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 category. And apart from that, we need to do the clinical criteria and RV dysfunction by thoracic echocardiography or CT pulmonary angiography and the cardiac marker. These 5 markers we must do to assess the risk of pulmonary embolism severity. Then only we can save the patient. Otherwise, we start them only on anticoagulants, they may sink later on. So whether there is a need for thrombolysis, we need to do all these 5 markers once we made the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism and started them anticoagulation. If the patient presents all the 5 markers, then he is high risk pulmonary embolism. That patient needs to undergo thrombolysis. If there is no risk factors available in a confirmed patients on anticoagulation, that rules out reperfusion need. If there is intermediate, if 1 or 2 categories, 1 or 2 factors are only present, we need to assess them for high or low risk category. So next week comes the management of pulmonary embolism. So whenever patient with suspected PE with highly unstable patient, low BP, low saturation, requiring high oxygen support, unable to ship them for CTPA, just do the bedside echocardiogram. Look for any RV dysfunction. If there is no RV dysfunction, look for other causes of shock or instability. Or if there is any RV dysfunction present, stabilize them, then it can do the CTPA. If the CTPA is confirmed, you start them on treatment with thrombolysis. If there is no CTPA is normal, look for other causes of shock. This is an unstable patient with suspected pulmonary embolism. Next comes is the stable patient with pulmonary embolism. We need to do the clinical probability scoring. In a high-risk patient, no need to do any probability scoring. Directly go ahead with echocardiography and assess the RV dysfunction. No RV dysfunction, look for other causes. If there is RV dysfunction, do a CTPA. If the CTPA confirm, treat them as high-risk pulmonary embolism. If the CTPA is negative, look for other causes of pulmonary embolism. Next comes with the stable patient and low and intermediate risk probability scoring. Do a D-dimer test. The D-dimer test is positive. Do a CTPA. If the CTPA is confirmed, treat them as the next algorithm. If the D-dimer is negative, no treatment is required for stable, low, and intermediate risk probability. Coming to the right side, stable patient with the high probability scoring, do a CTPA. If the CTPA is confirmed, treat them as PE. If there is no PE, look for other causes or do investigation further. Next comes is the treatment algorithm. Suspected or confirmed pulmonary embolism, stable patient, straight away start them on unfractured heparin. Why we need to start them on unfractured heparin in an unstable patient? Sometimes this may require a thrombolysis. For this only, we are start them on unfractured heparin. That's very, very important. Any unstable patient with suspected of pulmonary embolism, there may be any need for thrombolysis. Straight away start them on unfractured heparin. Apart from that, other causes include renal failure and a morbid obesity patient. You can start them on unfractured heparin. In a stable patient, suspected or confirmed pulmonary embolism, start them on low molecular heparin, enoxaparin or fondaparinux. Nowadays, they are recommending newer oral anticoagulation. You can start them on a stable, eligible patient. You can start them on newer oral anticoagulant. Sometimes they may start them vitamin K antagonists. The newer oral anticoagulants are contraindicated in pregnancy, lactation, and severe renal failure and the anti-phospholipid antibody syndrome. What is the preferred treatment for this category? We'll come to that later. So, stable patient, you can start them on low molecular heparin or fondaparinux or newer oral anticoagulant or vitamin K antagonist. Unstable patient, preferably start them on unfractured heparin. This is the dosage for low molecular heparin, enoxaparin, and fondaparinux. So, suspected high-risk pulmonary embolism, directly we start them on anticoagulation, stabilize them, so the BP stops, stabilize them, noradrenaline or dopamine, then stabilize them, then do a CTPA. The CTPA confirms the pulmonary embolism, do the thromboembolism, do thrombolysis. If the patient is still unstable, you may require ECMO, and you can stabilize them on ECMO and a CTPA. Then do a CTPA, and if there is any CTPA, you can do the surgical embolectomy or catheter-directed embolectomy. Why we need ECMO? Sometimes immediate cardiac arrest, refractory collapse in a stable patient, you may not do a thrombolysis in such kind of patient. In such kind of patient, you put them on echo, then do the CTPA, then you can do a surgical embolectomy or in situ thrombolysis or mechanical extraction of clot. If the patient is stable with the treatment, you can thrombolyze them, IV thrombolysis. So now it comes to the intermediate risk acute pulmonary embolism. Start them on anticoagulation. Then the patient become unstable. Treat them as high probability pulmonary embolism. That patient may require reperfusion treatment. If this patient is stable, look for the risk assessment. As I said earlier, RV dysfunction and pulmonary embolism severity index, and perform biomarkers TOP-T and NT-proBNP. If the markers are present, consider them a rescue reperfusion therapy, though they may start on anticoagulants previously. If they later on they show RV dysfunction or collapse, a systemic drop in BP or elevation of biomarker, you need to do a rescue thrombolysis. If nothing is present, you can continue only anticoagulants. That is enough. This is the preferred treatment regimen for thrombolysis. You can do RTPase or septokinase or urokinase. So next comes is the IVC filter. Is there any need for IVC filter? What are the indications for doing a IVC filter? IVC filter should be considered in patients with acute pulmonary embolism and absolute contraindication to anticoagulation. Absolute contraindication to anticoagulation, you can start them on IVC filters. And recurrence despite adequate therapeutic anticoagulation. Treatment failure with adequate anticoagulation, you can consider by IVC filter. Routine use of IVC filter is not recommended. So absolute contraindication to anticoagulation, failed following adequate therapeutic anticoagulation. These are the two indications for IVC filter. Next comes how much duration you have to continue for the anticoagulations. So all the patient must undergo 3 months treatment for anticoagulation, whether it is a stable patient, unstable patient, or reversible risk, unreversible risk. Every patient must undergo 3 months of anticoagulation. So this is a low risk patient for recurrence. That means following a surgery or confined acute medical illness for long duration of time or major trauma. This is the major risk factors for development of pulmonary embolism. If you are able to find a major risk for this pulmonary embolism, if you are able to find an adequate cause for this pulmonary embolism, just 3 months treatment with anticoagulants required. If you are able to find a definite cause for this pulmonary embolism, or this cause is amountable to development of pulmonary embolism, the risk of recurrence is very, very low. Just 3 months treatment is just 3 months treatment is enough. If you are not able to find the risk for pulmonary embolism, are very trivial cause for development of pulmonary embolism, you need to give extended treatment for anticoagulation. So just a minor surgery, less than 30 minutes surgery in a patient with less than 3 days of confinement, or leg injury without fracture, then long haul flight, just after a flight travel for 3 hours, then he developed pulmonary embolism. This is a trivial factor. If that kind of patients develop this much of pulmonary embolism, you need to continue them for anticoagulation for long term. Just small cause means you need to continue for treatment for longer duration of treatment. If a definite big cause, just 3 months of treatment with anticoagulants, just like 3 months, anticoagulants is enough. So next comes is the lifelong anticoagulation therapy. Who are the patient need to be on lifelong anticoagulation therapy? Cancer, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, recurrent venous thromboembolism. These are the 3 indications. These patients with pulmonary embolism, they have to be on indefinite period for anticoagulation. So these are the newer oral anticoagulants which are available. The apixaban, endoxaban, rivaroxaban. This inhibits factor 5A. Only the dabigatran target the thrombin factors. These are newer oral anticoagulant. You can start them on straight away. Newer oral anticoagulant in acute pulmonary embolism in an eligible patient who was stable or OP management. You can start them on newer oral anticoagulant instead of IV anticoagulation. Now we come to the specific conditions in pulmonary embolism. So, APLA, this is very, very important. I would like to make the point into all the physicians, other people. Any patient with antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, the only drug available is vitamin K antagonist. There should not be any drug apart from that. This is the only drug which can prevent recurrent pulmonary embolism in patients with acute APLA syndrome. This is the only drug should be started. Otherwise, no need to start on no need to start on low molecular heparin or newer oral anticoagulant. There may be a recurrence. This is the only approved drug in antiphospholipid syndrome. Then cancer, you can start them on newer oral anticoagulant or low molecular heparin. They said that preferably in the first 6 months, you can start them on low molecular heparin in a cancer patient. After 6 months, you can switch over them to newer oral anticoagulant. Preferably endoxaban and rivaroxaban. Mainly, there may be risk of GA bleed, especially in gastric cancers. So that these newer oral anticoagulants are not recommended in gastric cancer. Apart from that, all the cancers who are requiring extended treatment, indefinite treatment with anticoagulation, you can start them on newer oral anticoagulation. These are the 3 indications which requires indefinite treatment for anticoagulation: APLA syndrome, cancer, and a recurrent VTE, and the no reversible risk factor. You are not able to find any risk factor for this patient, but he developed pulmonary embolism. That means that patient has to be on indefinite anticoagulation treatment. So, is there any role for poor man's apple? This patient is not able to afford for heparin or oral anticoagulant. You can start them on aspirin. That's also prevent recurrence of pulmonary embolism in some patients. You can keep this drug reserved for poor man's apple. Some people who can't afford. Now comes the specific situation: pregnancy and pulmonary embolism. What are the causes of development of pulmonary embolism in pregnancy? Obesity, IVF treatment, stillbirth, preeclampsia, following cesarean section, PPH, and postpartum, especially postpartum pregnancy, they can develop pulmonary embolism. How to make a diagnosis of pulmonary embolism in pregnancy? We need to have various factors. Apart from that, clinical probability, D-dimer measurement, compression ultrasound, CT pulmonary angiogram. So all these 4 factors are necessary to diagnose pulmonary embolism in pregnant patients. So this is algorithm for suspected pulmonary embolism during pregnancy. Whenever you have a high risk of high index of suspicion, do a D-dimer test. If D-dimer is positive, anticoagulate them with low molecular heparin. Then what to do? Do a chest X-ray and a compression ultrasound. As I said, you have a 4-point compression ultrasound examination: bilateral femoral and bilateral popliteal. If the symptoms suggest of leg pain and swelling of the legs. If the proximal DVT is present, it confirms the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. No need to do any further testing. Pregnant patient, D-dimer is elevated, proximal DVT is present, by compression ultrasound, you confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism, start them on low molecular heparin, and do the risk assessment for RV dysfunction. That's very, very important. Next, if the DVT is not present, do a chest X-ray. The patient have a normal chest X-ray and high index of suspicion for pulmonary embolism, elevated D-dimer, you must do a CT pulmonary angiogram or lung perfusion scanning. If the chest X-ray is abnormal, you need to work out for other causes of hypoxia apart from pulmonary embolism. So in pulmonary embolism in pregnancy, low molecular weight heparin is preferred by this guideline. Why means they have a safety profile, known pharmacokinetic profile, and low bleeding risk, low thrombocytopenia. They said you need to start them on low molecular heparin. The problem with low molecular heparin in pregnant patient is if you want to go them on cesarean section or epidural or spinal anesthesia, you need to stop the drug for more than 24 hours. In case of unfractionated heparin, you can start if you start them on unfractionated heparin, just 4 hours period to the start of epidural spinal anesthesia. You can do stop the drugs for 4 hours. This is a shorter duration, unfractionated heparin. Low volume heparin, you need to stop them for more than 24 hours. How to differentiate amniotic fluid embolism and pulmonary embolism in the pregnancy? That's very tricky question. So any patient with sudden onset of respiratory and cardiac deterioration, sudden onset of respiratory and cardiac deterioration with DIC. There might be a stance for amniotic fluid embolism. Sudden onset respiratory deterioration, cardiac deterioration, and DIC, by which we can differentiate pulmonary embolism from amniotic fluid embolism. And how to follow up these kind of patients? Look for long-term sequelae of development of chronic pulmonary thromboembolism. So once you made the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism, you anticoagulate them, follow them after 3 to 6 months time, and look for any dyspnea or functional limitation. If there is no dyspnea or functional limitation, assess for risk of chronic thromboembolic pulmonary embolism. There is none present, you can continue the anticoagulation. If after 6 months of anticoagulation, patient have any of this dyspnea or functional limitation, you must do the transthoracic echocardiography. If there is any evidence of pulmonary hypertension, and do a ventilation perfusion scan, look for mismatch perfusion defect. If it is there, it confirms chronic pulmonary thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension. If there is any intermediate risk, you can do for markers like NT-proBNP or CT pulmonary angiogram and confirm the diagnosis of chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension. If it is none of these present, you can continue only anticoagulation. This is the follow-up of patients. Look for any development of chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension after 3 months of anticoagulation in a suspected or confirmed case of pulmonary embolism. Thank you so much, sir.
Segar?
Yeah, it's a very clean presentation, very nice presentation, very full of clinical points. Not a word was wasted. You are looking at the clinics are so much, no? You just want to just like college notes. This can be this cannot be this. Very clear guidelines, sir. We are enjoying very. As Dr. RTS told, great clarity in the talk. Thank you, Dr. Nagarajan, sir.
Okay,
and the thing has told pulmonary embolism very easy. Thank you. Very easy to approach it. Your answers are so nice.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
So it's open for questions. Any questions? The audience can post in the chat box. Before that, I invite our Mulidan sir for his vote of thanks.
Really, it is a pleasant duty to propose a vote of thanks. That too, after a great talk, really a very good academicist. Really, what I would say is, your patients are very much fortunate because the pulmonary embolism, even during the college days, even during the clinical practice, I always find it a dry subject. But you have made it easy. One Dr. Prithviraj, he has made a comment, very good comment, that pulmonary embolism made easy. Thank you, sir. This is a comment from Dr. Prithviraj. One comment from Dr. Aarti. Great clarity in that task. Thank you, doctor. So, likewise, a wonderful feedback. Also, you are emphasizing the important points. I think you are a very good teacher. Very good teacher.
Thank you, sir.
A good clinician.
The clinician.
A good teacher. Unless you educate the patient, unless you spend some time with the patient, you cannot give such a clarity. Very good clarity. Rightly pointed by Dr. Segar. Wonderful clarity for each and every field. whether it's diabetology or pulmonology or cardiology, you may be a very good clinician, but without spending the time with the patient, without clarifying the facts, how to differentiate, when to initiate, when to not initiate, when to do the D-dimer, when to do the PTCA, is it necessary, when to combine everything, or amniotic fluid embolism, pulmonary embolism, how to differentiate. So really, you made a very good presentation, such a clarity, and also rule of 80, rule of 40,
What is
other points. When you at the introduction of your speech, you were telling about the 60 slides, 64 slides. I was wondering, big topic, but you have made it very simple. Not a single minute people were deviated. Really wonderful. Really, I am very thankful to your talk, and also Sagar pointed out rightly identified you for this talk in the virtual meet. You made this evening a very meaningful and fruitful, and I really thank you very much, and all the audience. There are a lot of questions in the chat box. One question from Dr. Pallichami. What is the incidence of pulmonary embolism in COVID-19?
Yes, sir. In a outpatient and ward patient, the incidence is only 1%. In ICU, it is a 30% incidence.
I see.
ICU is 30%. In ward patient is 1%.
One question from Dr. Sasikala Devi. What is the picture in cold with embolism?
code is COPD? I mean, she means
COPD,
yeah.
COPD with embolism. As I said earlier, disproportionate dyspnea. If you now been not able to find the cause for cause apart from stabilizing the patient with the COPD, the patient continues with dystic apart from controlling the bronchospasm or treatment with the secondary infection. If you're not able to relieve the patient from breathlessness, you must suspect pulmonary embolism in COPD patient. If you're not able to find the cause apart from COPD, you must suspect pulmonary embolism.
And that's the clinical acumen which you should develop, sir. That's
Yes.
when to look for is really very important. Sir,
Rule of 8 is very much appreciable. Yeah.
in case of pulmonary, when you suspect a strongly in case of PE and you give heparin or these drugs, suppose if happens to be not to be a case of PE, any patient will get harmed by the dose of anticoagulants which you give.
No, nothing, sir. Just here only just one start. The patient not going to develop any complication. Just stating a one start. Just start the one dose and do the workup otherwise. Because if we miss the first dose, they may collapse during the investigation. So in a high index of suspicion, directly start them an anticoagulant dose and do the echocardiography or D-dimer or CTPA, what are the facility, or you can do a compression ultrasound that you can make the it will take a half an hour to 1 hour time. By the time we give anticoagulation, nothing will happen.
The doctors become very good.
Correct.
And doctors found to be a very useful tool. No?
Yeah, excellent, sir. Yes, sir.
And
X-ray. That's it.
And next thing, there are it always told as per statistic, PE can produce death even after 3 to 4 weeks or months of PE after incidence. What's the cause of death in those cases when this gets postponed? What is the cause?
Yeah, if you're able to, this is a precipitating factor. What is the precipitating factor? If you're now not able to find the precipitating factor for pulmonary embolism, you need to continue the anticoagulants for lifelong.
Lifelong.
If you're able to identify the cause, just following a big trauma, just following a big surgery, or a veteran for more than 3 months, this is the confirmed cause for development of pulmonary embolism. That means this patient, if you give treatment for 3 months, you can stop it. If you are not able to find the cause, or just a small travel, or just a small sprain and develop the pulmonary embolism, that means this patient has to be on long-term anticoagulants. If you stop them on after 3 months, they may develop the recurrence and they may die because of recurrence of pulmonary embolism. That may be the cause for your death after 3 months, recurrence.
And in the long-standing cases, the patient has to take lifelong, which is the best drug, which will be aspirin is very good, as you told. Aspirin and clopidogrel, they all come in the picture.
Yes, sir. Clopidogrel not by the guideline. In anti-phospholipid antibody syndrome, the only drug is the warfarin, anti-vitamin K antagonist. In cancer patient, until let them cure, you can start them on low molecular heparin, then switch over to low molecular, newer oral anticoagulant. Now, other stable patients, no other comorbidities, after you can start them on newer oral apixaban, rivaroxaban, or dabigatran, whatever you are comfortable with drug, you can start them on treatment. all these drugs you can continue, sir. No issues with that. Not major issues.
When the patient is pregnant, when you go for a CT pulmonary angiogram, it won't. It is usually pregnancy is contraindicated, but in situation it's okay. In this life-threatening situation, probably you can go for CT and X-ray. Isn't
Yes,
it?
so you need first you need to do a D-dimer test. If the D-dimer is high, the suspicion is high, then you can do a echocardiography. Echography, you are able to find RV dysfunction. No need to do any CT chest or other investigation. If you are not able to do not able to find any cause in the cardiac echocardiography, you do a simple chest X-ray. The chest X-ray is normal, but almost rules of the possible that is suspicion for pulmonary embolism. The chest X-ray is abnormal, that may be due to other cause of pulmonary. In that case, you can wait and watch. The X-ray is normal in a pregnant patient and suspected pulmonary embolism. Go ahead with pulmonary. You go ahead with the CTPA.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Compression ultrasound, how often you do it?
Regularly we are doing. If any patient admitted with shock, cardiogenic shock, or any shock patient, we need to do a compression ultrasound for all the patient to identify the cause of cause. In that case, you may find a DVT in the DVT in the proximal DVT, that may be femoral or popliteal. We are able to identify a DVT and the shock and the RV dysfunction. Definitely confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. But start doing on anticoagulation and as well as thrombolysis.
Thank you, doctor. Really wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
If there are no questions, Bas, Sagar Bas.
Yeah, I will. So I thank sir and Nagarajan. I thank all the participants, and I thank Lupin Respiratory Division for sponsoring, for giving such a very nice CME to all of us. And I thank everyone again, all the participants for their active participation and the interaction. Thank you.